Embracing grace, the transformative power of God's love. The journey of faith reveals a profound truth. The more conscious we become of God's love for us, the more our lives are transformed by that love. This transformation leads to a surprising outcome. The less we find ourselves entangled in sin. It's a spiritual paradox that those who are deeply aware of the magnitude of their forgiveness tend to walk in greater levels of love and obedience. Those who are forgiven much, love much, as beautifully illustrated in the Gospel of Luke, Luke 7:47, encapsulates this principle. It's not our striving that produces holiness, but our surrender to the overwhelming grace of God. Understanding the depth of God's grace is key to experiencing its dominion in our lives. Grace, in its essence, is God's unmerited favor towards us, His proactive love that reaches out to us even when we are utterly undeserving. The Apostle Paul tells us, "For sin shall no longer be your master, because you are not under the law, but under grace." Romans 6:14. This pivotal statement marks the transition from a life governed by the law's demands to a life flowing freely under the grace of God. When grace has dominion over us, it's not that we become lawless. Rather, we find that the love of God compels us to live righteously. Grace becomes the driving force behind our actions, not fear of punishment or desire for approval. This grace teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in this present age. Titus 2:12. Grasping God's grace means coming to a full realization of His unconditional love for us, a love that was demonstrated most vividly when Jesus Christ died for our sins on the cross. This realization awakens in us a profound sense of gratitude and love towards God, which naturally diminishes our desire to engage in sin. As we grow in our understanding of the depth and breadth of God's love, we find our hearts being changed, our priorities shifting, and our lives aligning more closely with His will. This does not imply that we will never sin again, but it does mean that sin loses its power over us. Our relationship with God is no longer transactional, based on keeping a set of rules, but transformational, rooted in a deep personal connection with Him. We become more sensitive to His Spirit's leading, more responsive to His guidance, and more grieved by anything that disrupts our fellowship with Him. Living under grace is living in the freedom to become all that God has created us to be. It's embracing our identity as beloved children of God, forgiven, redeemed, and set apart for His purposes. This freedom is not an excuse for laxity, but an invitation to live lives of purpose and passion for God. As we become more conscious of God's immense love for us, let that love be the catalyst for transformation in our lives. Let us move from merely avoiding sin to actively pursuing righteousness, from duty to delight, and from obligation to overflow of love. In doing so, we bear witness to the power of grace that now rules in our hearts, a grace that is sufficient for every need, strong in our weakness, and victorious over every sin. The dominion of grace over our lives is a beautiful expression of God's love in action. As we grow in our understanding and experience of this grace, we discover the joy of living in freedom, the beauty of a transformed life, and the peace of being deeply rooted in God's unfailing love. Let us, therefore, embrace this grace with open hearts, allowing it to shape us, guide us, and lead us into the fullness of life that God intends for each of us.